Cruel Man Abandoned. 5. Helpless. Bear cubs near a highway. Shocking happened. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick cloud cover as Logan Carter drove his beaten-up pickup truck along Highway 16. The stretch of road cut through dense woodland, a ribbon of asphalt dividing the wilderness. Logan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The truck bed behind him contained a squirming burlap sack, the contents of which made soft whimpering sounds that had been tormenting him for the past hour. He had found them 3 days ago, while clearing brush near the Johnson property. The mother bear must have been hunting, leaving her cubs temporarily in what she thought was a safe den. Logan had surprised them, and in his panic he had made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He couldn't leave them. Someone else might find them and kill them. He couldn't call animal control. They'd ask too many questions about why he was on private property. So he had taken them, thinking he'd figure something out. But caring for 5 bear cubs in his tiny trailer had quickly become impossible. They cried constantly, destroyed what little furniture he had, and he was running out of the milk formula he had bought at the farm supply store. His neighbor had started asking questions about the strange noises. Logan felt trapped, with no good options left. The highway roared with morning traffic, 18-wheelers, commuters rushing to work, school buses full of children. Logan pulled his truck onto the gravelly shoulder, the tires crunching over loose stones. He sat for a moment, engine idling, his face a mask of conflict. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped out into the crisp morning air. The burlap sack moved more frantically now. Logan reached into the truck bed, grabbed the sack, and roughly pulled it out. He walked several paces from the highway toward a small clearing that led into the woods. With shaking hands, he untied the sack and dumped its contents onto the ground. 5 tiny black bear cubs tumbled out, their fur matted and eyes wide with fear. They huddled together immediately, whimpering and searching for their mother. The smallest one tried to follow Logan as he backed away, its confused eyes locked on the only caregiver it had known for the past 3 days. "Go on, get!" Logan shouted, waving his arms to scare them toward the woods. "Go find your mama!" His voice cracked with emotion he refused to acknowledge. The cubs only pressed closer together, too frightened to move. Logan felt a wave of shame wash over him, but he pushed it down. This was the best he could do. They'd find their way back to their mother, or maybe someone better equipped would find them. He couldn't risk his probation being revoked for trespassing charges. As Logan climbed back into his truck, he didn't notice the silver sedan that had slowed down on the opposite side of the highway. He didn't see Savannah Reed staring in disbelief at the scene unfolding before her. She had just witnessed the entire heartless abandonment. Savannah's hands trembled as she pulled her car to the shoulder. A biology teacher at the local high school, she immediately recognized the black bundles as bear cubs, far too young to survive on their own. Her mind raced with questions. Where was their mother? How long had they been separated? And most disturbingly, what kind of person would dump helpless wildlife so close to a dangerous highway? Traffic continued to thunder past as Savannah cautiously stepped out of her car. She looked both ways, waiting for a break in the flow of vehicles. The cubs remained huddled together, one of them wobbling dangerously close to the road. Savannah's heart raced as a semi-truck blared its horn, startling the smallest cub even closer to the highway's edge. "Oh no," she whispered, watching in horror as the tiny creature's paw touched the asphalt. She had to act now, but how could she safely cross the highway? And what would she do once she reached them? Savannah pulled out her phone, frantically searching for the wildlife rescue hotline number she remembered seeing on a billboard. As she dialed, she kept her eyes fixed on the cubs, silently willing them to stay away from the rushing traffic just feet away from their trembling bodies. The smallest cub took another step onto the highway, unaware of the danger. A blue sedan swerved slightly to avoid it, honking loudly. The noise sent the cub scampering back to its siblings, but Savannah knew it was only a matter of time before tragedy struck. "Wildlife emergency? Please, I need help immediately," she said when someone finally answered. "There are 5 bear cubs abandoned on Highway 16, about 2 miles east of the River Rock exit. They're right on the roadside and in danger of being hit. I don't know what to do." The dispatcher's calm voice instructed Savannah to stay in her vehicle and not approach the cubs. A rescue team would be dispatched immediately, but it would take at least 30 minutes to reach her location. 30 minutes, Savannah repeated, watching another cub venture toward the road. They might not have 30 minutes. As if to confirm her fears, the largest cub suddenly bolted onto the highway, perhaps spooked by a particularly loud truck passing by. Savannah screamed as a red pickup truck barely missed the animal, honking furiously. The cub froze in terror in the middle of the lane. Savannah couldn't wait any longer. Against the dispatcher's instructions, she hung up and looked for her chance to cross. When traffic momentarily thinned, she dashed across the highway, her heart pounding with each step. Reaching the center lane, she paused as a car sped past, then continued to the other side where the frozen cub stood trembling. "It's okay, little one," she coaxed softly, slowly approaching the frightened animal. She had no experience handling wildlife, but she knew sudden movements would only scare it more. The cub looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. Savannah removed her light jacket, preparing to use it as a makeshift carrier. She inched closer to the cub, talking in a low, soothing voice. Just as she was about to reach it, the blast of a horn made both her and the cub jump. A massive logging truck was barreling down on them, the driver frantically trying to slow the enormous vehicle. In that moment, Savannah made a split-second decision. She lunged forward, wrapping her jacket around the cub and rolling toward the shoulder of the road. The truck roared past, missing them by inches, its driver shouting something Savannah couldn't hear over the pounding of her own heart. The cub squirmed in her grasp but didn't bite or scratch as she had feared. Instead, it seemed to press against her, seeking warmth and protection. Savannah held it close as she stumbled to her feet and headed toward the other cubs, who were still huddled together at the edge of the clearing. "It's okay," she whispered, though she knew they couldn't understand her. I've got you all." As Savannah approached the remaining cubs with their sibling wrapped in her jacket, she wondered what on earth she was going to do next. She couldn't fit 5 bear cubs in her small sedan, and even if she could, where would she take them? Her apartment had a strict no pets policy, let alone wild animals. The sound of a vehicle pulling over made her turn. A forest green SUV had stopped behind her car, and a man in what looked like a park ranger uniform stepped out. Relief flooded through Savannah as he quickly assessed the situation and jogged over to her. "Wildlife rescue," he called out as he approached. "Someone called in about abandoned bear cubs?" "Yes, that was me," Savannah said, still cradling the cub in her jacket. "There are 5 of them. Some man just dumped them here and drove off." The ranger nodded grimly. "I'm Michael Hayes. We've had reports of missing cubs from a tagged mother bear in this area. She's been searching for them for days. Did you happen to see the vehicle that dropped them?" Savannah described Logan's truck and gave the ranger the partial license plate she had managed to memorize. As she spoke, Michael carefully set up a large animal carrier he had brought from his vehicle. "You've done exactly the right thing," he assured her, gently taking the cub from her jacket. "But these little ones need specialized care before we can attempt to reunite them with their mother." Together, they carefully gathered the remaining cubs, who seemed too exhausted and frightened to resist. Michael explained that they were severely dehydrated and probably hadn't eaten properly for days. Once all 5 cubs were secure in the carrier, he turned to Savannah with sincere gratitude. "You saved their lives today. Most people wouldn't have stopped." Savannah watched as Michael loaded the carrier into his SUV. "Will they be okay?" she asked, unable to hide the worry in her voice. "We'll do everything we can," Michael promised. "If you leave me your number, I can keep you updated on their progress." As she wrote down her contact information, Savannah couldn't shake the image of the man dumping the helpless cubs by the roadside. What about the person who did this? Will there be consequences? Michael's expression hardened. Absolutely. Wildlife abandonment is a serious offense, especially with an endangered species. If we can identify him from the license plate, he'll face criminal charges. Savannah nodded, satisfied. As she watched Michael's SUV pull away with the precious cargo, she realized she was shaking from the adrenaline crash. She had never done anything so dangerous or so important in her entire life. What she didn't know yet was that this chance encounter would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The story of the highway bear cubs was just beginning, and Savannah Reed had unwittingly become a central character in a drama that would captivate their small town and beyond. 2 days after the rescue, Savannah couldn't stop thinking about the bear cubs. She had received one brief text from Ranger Hayes confirming they had survived the night and were receiving treatment at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, but she craved more information. The image of their frightened eyes and tiny paws kept her awake at night. After school on Friday, instead of heading home, Savannah found herself driving to the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. She hadn't planned to visit, hadn't even known exactly where it was until she looked it up, but something pulled her there like a magnetic force. The center was tucked away on a large, wooded property about 30 minutes outside of town. A modest sign marked the entrance to a gravel driveway that wound through towering pines. Savannah parked next to several official-looking vehicles and approached the main building, a sprawling single-story structure with a sign requesting visitors to check in at the front desk. "I'm sorry, but we're not open for public tours today," said the receptionist, a kindly older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. "I'm not here for a tour," Savannah explained. "I'm the person who called about the abandoned bear cubs on Highway 16 2 days ago. I wanted to see how they're doing." The receptionist's expression softened. "Oh, you're the highway hero. Michael told us about you. Wait here, I'll see if he's available." Before Savannah could protest that she wasn't a hero, just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time, the receptionist disappeared through a door behind the desk. A few minutes later, Michael Hayes emerged, wearing green scrubs instead of his ranger uniform. His face lit up with recognition. "Miss Reed, I didn't expect to see you here." "Savannah, please," she corrected with a small smile. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to check on the cubs." Michael's expression grew serious. "Actually, your timing is perfect. We've been trying to get them to eat, but they're refusing most food. The smallest one is particularly concerning. She's lost weight since arrival, which is dangerous given how underweight they all were to begin with." Savannah's heart sank. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Michael studied her for a moment, then nodded. Sometimes, with traumatized wildlife, they form quick attachments to their rescuers. "Would you mind coming back to the treatment area?" It's worth trying to see if your presence might calm them enough to feed. Savannah followed Michael through a series of hallways until they reached a secure door marked Rehabilitation Area, Authorized Personnel Only. After using his keycard to gain entry, he led her to a room at the end of the corridor. Inside, the 5 bear cubs were housed in a large enclosure with branches, bedding, and several hiding spots. 4 of them were huddled together in a corner, watching warily as the humans entered. The 5th, the smallest one, lay alone near a feeding station, barely lifting its head at their approach. "That's the one I'm most worried about," Michael said quietly. "We've named her Hope, as a reminder of what we're fighting for." Savannah approached the enclosure slowly, kneeling down to get closer to eye level with the cubs. Hope raised her head slightly, her dull eyes focusing on Savannah. "Hey there, little one," Savannah whispered. "Remember me? From the highway?" To both her and Michael's surprise, Hope made a small sound and struggled to her feet. She wobbled over to the edge of the enclosure closest to Savannah, sniffing the air curiously. "That's the most movement we've seen from her since you brought them in," Michael said, clearly amazed. "Let me get some formula." He returned quickly with a small bottle of specialized milk replacement. After putting on protective gloves, Savannah carefully accepted the bottle through a small feeding hatch in the enclosure. Hope approached cautiously, sniffed the bottle, and after a moment's hesitation, began to suckle. "It's working," Michael whispered, not wanting to break the spell. One by one, the other cubs grew curious and ventured closer. Soon, all 5 were taking turns feeding from the bottle Savannah offered. "You have a gift," Michael said as they watched the cubs eat their fill for the first time since arriving at the center. "Have you ever considered volunteering with wildlife?" Savannah shook her head. "I'm a biology teacher, but my experience is mostly in the classroom. I've never worked with animals like this before." "Well, you're a natural," Michael replied, "and we're always looking for volunteers, especially someone with a biology background." The idea took root in Savannah's mind immediately. She had always loved animals but had never considered working with wildlife. Yet here, watching these vulnerable creatures fighting for survival, something clicked into place. "I could come on weekends, maybe some afternoons after school," she found herself saying. "If you think I could help." Michael's smile was answer enough. "I think these little ones have already made that decision for us." As they finished feeding the cubs, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Michael excused himself to investigate, returning moments later with a serious expression. "The mother bear has been spotted near the highway again," he explained. "She's still searching for her cubs. Our tracking team thinks she's following their scent." Savannah's eyes widened. "Can you reunite them?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. "It's complicated. These cubs are still too weak for release, and we need to make sure the mother is healthy enough to care for them. There's also the matter of the man who took them. Until he's found, there's a risk he could interfere again." "Have there been any leads on finding him?" Savannah asked. "The sheriff's department is investigating based on the license plate information you provided. They're confident they'll identify him soon." As if on cue, Michael's phone buzzed with a message. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "They've identified the suspect, Logan Carter, local handyman with a history of trespassing and poaching charges." He looked up at Savannah. "They're bringing him in for questioning now." The name meant nothing to Savannah, but the thought of confronting the man who had so callously endangered these innocent creatures filled her with unexpected anger. What kind of person could look into those innocent eyes and still abandon them to almost certain death? "I want to be there," she said suddenly, "when they question him. I want to understand why he did this." Michael looked surprised. That's not usually how these things work, Savannah. It's a police matter now. I know, but... She glanced back at the cubs, now full and drowsy from their meal. I need to know, for them. After a moment's consideration, Michael nodded. I can't promise anything, but I'll speak to Sheriff Bennett. He and I go way back, and since you're a key witness, there might be a way. As they left the rehabilitation area, Savannah took one last look at the sleeping cubs. She had come here seeking closure, a way to put the highway incident behind her. Instead, she had found a new purpose and a mystery that was far from solved. What she didn't realize was that Logan Carter's story was more complicated than it appeared, and that the truth behind the abandoned cubs would uncover secrets that had been buried in their small town for generations. Secrets that some powerful people would do anything to keep hidden. The River Rock County Sheriff's Office was housed in a sturdy brick building at the center of town. When Savannah arrived the following morning, Michael was already waiting outside, dressed in his official ranger uniform. Sheriff Bennett agreed to let us observe the questioning, he explained as they walked inside. But we need to stay quiet and not interfere. Savannah nodded, smoothing down her blouse nervously. She hadn't slept well, her mind racing with questions about the man who had abandoned the cubs. Sheriff Jacob Bennett met them in the lobby. He was a tall, imposing figure with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. He nodded curtly to Michael before turning his attention to Savannah. Miss Reed, Ranger Hayes speaks highly of your actions on the highway. Not many civilians would put themselves at risk like that. I just did what anyone would do, Savannah replied, uncomfortable with the praise. The sheriff's expression suggested he disagreed with her assessment of anyone, but he didn't comment further. Instead, he led them down a hallway to a small room with a one-way mirror looking into an interrogation room. Through the glass, Savannah saw a man sitting alone at a metal table. Logan Carter was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His hands, clasped on the table, were rough and calloused, working hands. He wore a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a tattoo of a forest scene on his forearm. What struck Savannah most was that he didn't look like a monster. He looked tired, nervous, and very human. We picked him up at his trailer this morning, Sheriff Bennett explained. He didn't resist arrest, but he hasn't said much yet. As they watched, a deputy entered the interrogation room with a file folder and sat across from Logan. The questioning began with standard procedures, confirming his identity, explaining his rights. Logan answered in monosyllables, his eyes fixed on the table. Mr. Carter, the deputy finally said, you're here regarding 5 black bear cubs that were abandoned on Highway 16 2 days ago. A witness identified your vehicle at the scene. Do you understand the charges being considered against you? Logan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. For the record, please respond verbally, the deputy prompted. Yes, Logan said, his voice rough. I understand. Can you explain to us how you came to be in possession of 5 bear cubs and why you abandoned them by a highway? There was a long pause. Logan rubbed his face with both hands, then finally looked up. I was clearing brush on the Johnson property, he began. Mr. Johnson hired me to prepare the land for his new hunting cabin. Savannah noticed Michael and Sheriff Bennett exchange a meaningful glance at the mention of Johnson. I found them in a hollow under some fallen logs, Logan continued. No mother bear in sight. I waited for a while, but she didn't come back. I thought they'd die out there. So you took them? The deputy clarified. Logan nodded. I know it was stupid. I just reacted. Thought maybe I could drop them at a rescue place anonymously. And instead, you kept them for 3 days in your trailer, then dumped them by a busy highway?" The deputy's tone had hardened. Logan flinched visibly. I panicked. My landlord was coming to fix the plumbing. I would have lost my home if he found wild animals there. And I can't afford more legal trouble. I'm still on probation from the trespassing charge last year. "So, you chose to endanger 5 protected animals rather than face the consequences of your actions." Logan's shoulders slumped. "I thought they'd find their way to the woods. I didn't think it through." From the observation room, Sheriff Bennett made a dismissive sound. Typical Carter. His father was the same way. Act first, think never. Savannah found herself studying Logan's defeated posture, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. There was something in his story that didn't quite add up. "Sheriff," she asked quietly, "who is Mr. Johnson that Logan mentioned?" The sheriff's expression darkened. "Alexander Johnson. Owns half the county, including most of the woodland along that highway. State senator's brother-in-law, not someone you want to cross. And the property Logan was clearing. Is that part of the protected forest where the mother bear was tagged?" Michael looked at her sharply. "Yes, actually." "How did you know that?" "Just connecting the dots," Savannah murmured, her mind racing. "So, Logan was hired to clear protected land, where he happened to find the cubs, and now he's taking all the blame while Mr. Johnson isn't mentioned in the charges." Sheriff Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "Johnson claims he hired Carter for legitimate work on his property, not knowing Carter would venture into protected areas. There's no evidence to contradict that." In the interrogation room, the questioning continued. Logan admitted to everything but seemed resigned to his fate, offering little defense for his actions beyond his initial panic. "Something's not right," Savannah whispered to Michael as they watched. "He's hiding something." "Or protecting someone," Michael agreed, his expression thoughtful. When the formal questioning ended, the deputy left Logan alone in the room while they processed his statement. Sheriff Bennett turned to leave the observation area, but Savannah stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Sheriff, may I speak with him? Just for a minute?" Bennett looked surprised. "That's highly irregular, Ms. Reed. Please, I think he'll talk to me." Savannah wasn't sure why she felt this certainty, but something told her Logan Carter would be more honest with her than with law enforcement. After a moment's consideration and a nod from Michael, the sheriff reluctantly agreed. 5 minutes, and Deputy Ellis stays in the room. Savannah entered the interrogation room with her heart pounding. Logan looked up, confusion crossing his features as he clearly tried to place her. "Mr. Carter, I'm Savannah Reed. I'm the person who found the bear cubs after you left them on the highway." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by shame. He looked away. Are they okay?" The question surprised her. There seemed to be genuine concern in his voice. "They're alive," she said carefully. "The smallest one is struggling, but they're getting good care." Logan nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "Good. That's good." Savannah sat down across from him. "Mr. Carter, I don't believe you're telling the whole truth about what happened, and I think there's more to this story than you're sharing." That got his attention. His eyes snapped to hers, wary but curious. "Why would you think that?" he asked cautiously. "Because a man who cares enough to ask if the cubs are okay wouldn't have abandoned them by a highway unless he was truly desperate. And because the land you were clearing isn't just any land. It's protected forest where a tagged mother bear has been living." Logan's expression tightened, but he remained silent. Mr. Johnson hired you to clear that land, knowing it was protected, didn't he? Savannah pressed gently. And when you found the cubs, he told you to get rid of them because they'd attract wildlife officials who would stop his development plans. For a long moment, Logan said nothing. The deputy shifted uncomfortably by the door. Finally, Logan leaned forward. "You don't understand what you're getting into, ma'am," he said quietly. "Johnson owns this town. People who cross him tend to regret it." "People like you?" Savannah asked. A bitter smile crossed Logan's face. "My father worked for the Johnsons for 20 years. When he reported Alexander's father for illegal logging in the National Forest, he was fired and blacklisted. Couldn't get work anywhere in the county. Drank himself to death within a year." Savannah felt a chill run down her spine. "So, why work for them now? Because when you've got a record like mine, you take what you can get." Logan's voice was resigned. Johnson was clear about what he wanted cleared and what would happen if I ran into any complications. "The cubs were a complication," Savannah concluded. Logan nodded slightly. "He told me to handle it and make sure no one from Wildlife Services had any reason to come nosing around his property. Said if I took care of it quietly, there'd be more work for me. And you needed the work." "I needed to eat," Logan corrected. "But I couldn't kill them like he wanted. So I thought maybe—" He trailed off, the futility of his half-formed plan apparent to them both. The deputy cleared his throat, signaling that Savannah's time was up. She stood, her mind whirling with this new information. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Carter." As she turned to leave, Logan called after her softly. "They deserved better than me. I'm glad you found them." Outside in the hallway, Sheriff Bennett and Michael were waiting with tense expressions. It was clear they had been listening. "You can't seriously be considering going after Alexander Johnson," the sheriff said without preamble. "His family practically built this town. And apparently they've been destroying protected wildlife habitat," Savannah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "If Mr. Carter is telling the truth, then Johnson is the one who should be facing charges, not just his desperate employee." Michael stepped forward. "Jacob, we've suspected Johnson of encroaching on the wildlife preserve for months. If Carter's testimony confirms it—" The sheriff ran a hand over his face. "You're talking about taking on the most powerful family in River Rock. They fund my department's equipment, for God's sake." "Then maybe it's time someone else took a stand," Savannah said quietly. As they argued in hushed tones, none of them noticed the sleek black car pulling up outside the sheriff's office, or the distinguished gray-haired man who stepped out. Alexander Johnson himself, arriving to ensure his interests were protected, as they always had been in River Rock. What Savannah had stumbled into was much bigger than 5 abandoned bear cubs. It was a decades-long story of power, corruption, and environmental destruction that had shaped their small town in ways she was only beginning to understand. And now she was part of it. Alexander Johnson's arrival at the sheriff's office created an immediate change in atmosphere. Deputies who had been casually chatting fell silent as he strode through the lobby, his tailored suit and commanding presence demanding attention without a word being spoken. Sheriff Bennett straightened his uniform when he spotted Johnson through the glass door of the hallway. "This just got complicated," he muttered to Michael and Savannah. "Let me handle this." As Bennett moved to intercept Johnson, Michael pulled Savannah into an empty office. "We need to be strategic here," he whispered urgently. "Johnson has the resources to make this investigation disappear if he wants to." Savannah's mind was racing. "We need evidence, something that ties Johnson directly to the illegal clearing and the cubs." The cubs themselves are evidence, Michael pointed out. Their DNA will match the tagged mother bear, and we have satellite imagery of her territory that includes Johnson's property. But that only proves where they came from, not that Johnson ordered Logan to get rid of them, Savannah countered. We need more. Their hushed conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Without waiting for a response, Alexander Johnson himself entered, followed by a visibly uncomfortable Sheriff Bennett. Johnson was in his 60s, with perfectly styled silver hair and piercing blue eyes that had likely intimidated countless opponents in boardrooms and political meetings. His smile was practiced and didn't reach his eyes as he extended his hand to Michael. Ranger Hayes. Always a pleasure to see our wildlife services so proactive. Michael shook the offered hand briefly. Mr. Johnson, I didn't expect to see you here today. When I heard one of my contractors was involved in a wildlife incident, I naturally wanted to offer any assistance I could. Johnson's gaze shifted to Savannah, assessing. And you must be the heroic teacher I've been hearing about. Savannah Reed, correct? The Johnson Educational Foundation funds several programs at River Rock High, I believe. The implied connection wasn't subtle. Savannah forced herself to remain calm as she nodded. Yes, including our advanced biology lab. Wonderful facilities, Johnson said smoothly. It would be a shame if budget constraints affected them in the future. Before Savannah could respond to the thinly veiled threat, Sheriff Bennett cleared his throat. Mr. Johnson has come to provide context about Logan Carter's employment, he explained, which may help clarify some aspects of the case. Johnson's smile remained fixed. Indeed, Carter is a troubled young man with a history of poor decisions. I gave him a chance when few would, hiring him for some basic groundskeeping on a small section of my property that's being developed for a family retreat. A retreat in the middle of known bear habitat? Michael asked mildly. Johnson waved a dismissive hand. The property has been in my family for generations, Ranger Hayes, long before your department started putting tracking collars on wildlife and restricting land use. The area in question was designated as protected 2 years ago, Michael corrected, after your development application was denied by the County Planning Commission. A flash of irritation crossed Johnson's face before his smooth veneer returned. A regrettable misunderstanding that's currently under appeal. But that's hardly relevant to Carter's actions, which were taken entirely without my knowledge or approval. Savannah couldn't contain herself any longer. That's not what Mr. Carter says. Johnson turned his cold gaze fully on her. Ms. Reed, with all due respect, you're a high school teacher, not a law enforcement officer. Carter is a convicted poacher looking to shift blame. Who do you think the district attorney will find more credible? The threat hung in the air, but Savannah held his gaze. I think evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Johnson. And I think the truth has a way of coming out, especially when innocent lives are at stake. Something dangerous flickered in Johnson's eyes. Idealism is admirable in a teacher, Ms. Reed, but in the real world, things are rarely so black and white. He turned back to Sheriff Bennett. I expect Carter will be properly charged for his reckless endangerment of wildlife, and this matter can be put to rest. Sheriff Bennett nodded uncomfortably. We're processing the charges now. Excellent. Johnson straightened his already immaculate suit jacket. Then I won't take up any more of your valuable time. Sheriff, I'll see you at the fundraising gala next week. Your department's new tactical equipment should be ready for unveiling. After Johnson left, a heavy silence filled the room. Sheriff Bennett looked torn between duty and self-preservation. Jacob, Michael said quietly, using the sheriff's first name. You know this isn't right. Bennett sighed deeply. What I know is that we have a confession from Logan Carter, and going after Alexander Johnson would be career suicide, not just for me, but for anyone involved. He looked pointedly at both Michael and Savannah. So, you're just going to let Carter take the fall while Johnson continues destroying protected habitat? Savannah asked. The sheriff's expression hardened. I'm going to follow the evidence where it leads, Miss Reed. For now, that's to Logan Carter. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I'd advise both of you to do the same. Johnson doesn't make idle threats. After he left, Michael slumped against the wall. He's right about one thing. Johnson is powerful enough to make this very difficult. But not impossible, Savannah insisted. You said the mother bear is still searching for her cubs. Is there any way to use that? Michael considered this. Actually, there might be. Our wildlife cameras have captured her returning repeatedly to the area where her den was destroyed, on Johnson's property. If we could get official permission to search that area, would the sheriff grant that? Probably not, Michael admitted. But there's someone who might help us. The State Environmental Protection Director is an old friend of mine, and she's been trying to build a case against Johnson's illegal developments for years. If I can get her to issue an emergency habitat evaluation, Savannah felt a spark of hope. That would get you legal access to the property, and anything we find there would be admissible evidence, Michael confirmed, already pulling out his phone. It's worth a shot. As Michael made his call, Savannah thought about Logan Carter sitting alone in his cell, taking the blame for a powerful man's crimes. She thought about the 5 bear cubs fighting for survival, separated from their mother. And she thought about Alexander Johnson's cold eyes as he casually threatened her career. This had become about much more than saving 5 bear cubs. It was about justice, truth, and standing up to the kind of power that had gone unchecked for too long. What Savannah didn't know was that her involvement had already set off alarm bells for Alexander Johnson. In his office across town, he was making his own call, to a man whose name never appeared in any official capacity, but whose services Johnson had employed many times over the years to make problems disappear. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was quiet that evening. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only essential personnel to monitor the animals overnight. In the bear cub enclosure, 4 of the 5 cubs slept peacefully, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. But the smallest one, Hope, remained restless, moving from corner to corner of the enclosure, as if searching for something. Michael Hayes finished his final rounds, checking each habitat before heading home. When he reached the bear enclosure, he paused, watching Hope's unusual behavior. Still not settling down, little one, he murmured, making a note on his clipboard. Despite Savannah's successful feeding session earlier, Hope's vital signs remained concerning. The cub was fighting, but she needed something more than what the center could provide. As Michael turned to leave, his phone vibrated with a text message. It was from his contact at the State Environmental Protection Office. Emergency habitat evaluation approved for Johnson property. Papers will be delivered tomorrow morning. This is temporary. 48 hours only. Make it count. Michael allowed himself a small smile of triumph. It wasn't much time, but it might be enough. He quickly texted Savannah the news, adding, "Meet me at the center at 7 a.m., bring hiking boots." He was about to pocket his phone when movement outside the building caught his eye. Through the window, he spotted a figure moving along the perimeter fence. Too large to be an animal, too furtive to be a staff member. Michael dimmed the lights in the hallway and moved closer to the window, staying in the shadows. The figure, a man in dark clothing, appeared to be examining the security system at the rear entrance. Michael watched as the intruder took photos with his phone then melted back into the darkness of the surrounding forest. Michael immediately called security, but by the time they reached the area, the mysterious visitor was gone. All that remained was a set of boot prints in the soft earth near the fence, and an uneasy feeling that their investigation had just become much more dangerous. Alexander Johnson hung up the phone and stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office at the town below. River Rock had been Johnson territory for generations. His grandfather had built the logging empire that put the town on the map. His father had diversified into real estate and politics, and Alexander himself had continued the legacy, with developments that transformed former wilderness into exclusive properties for the wealthy. The wildlife preserve that now threatened his latest project was a recent annoyance, the result of environmental regulations that his political connections hadn't been able to prevent. But Alexander Johnson wasn't accustomed to letting obstacles stand in his way. "Problem, boss?" The question came from Ethan Marshall, Johnson's head of security and longtime fixer. "Potentially," Johnson replied, not turning from the window. "The Carter situation is attracting unwanted attention. A wildlife ranger and a schoolteacher are asking questions." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his muscular frame casting a long shadow across the plush carpet. "The ranger I know about, Hayes, has been a thorn in your side for years. But a schoolteacher?" "Savannah Reed," Johnson supplied. "Biology teacher at the high school. She's the one who found the cubs and called wildlife services. Now she's encouraging Carter to implicate me." Ethan shrugged. "Carter's word against yours. No contest. Ordinarily, I'd agree, but Hayes is trying to get an emergency evaluation of the property where the den was located. If they find evidence of the destruction before we can clean it up—" "What do you need me to do?" Ethan asked, straightforward as always. Johnson finally turned from the window. "2 things. First, make sure the area in question is sanitized, tonight. Second, get me everything you can on Savannah Reed. Everyone has pressure points, Ethan. I want to know hers." Ethan nodded, already pulling out his phone. "What about the cubs themselves?" "They're physical evidence that could connect to your property." A cold smile crossed Johnson's face. "I've already put someone on that. By morning, that particular problem should be resolved." What Johnson didn't know was that his conversation wasn't as private as he believed. Lily Morgan, his new administrative assistant, had returned to retrieve her forgotten purse and overheard everything from the outer office. She sat frozen at her desk, her hand covering her mouth to stifle her gasp of shock. Lily had only been working for Johnson Enterprises for 3 weeks. The job paid well, better than any other administrative position in River Rock, but she had already noticed disturbing patterns in her boss's business practices. This, however, was far worse than questionable permits or corporate tax avoidance. He was talking about destroying evidence, about finding pressure points to use against a teacher, and something about the bear cubs that made her blood run cold. As silently as possible, Lily gathered her purse and crept toward the elevator. She needed to warn someone. But who? Sheriff Bennett was notoriously in Johnson's pocket. Most of the town council owed their positions to Johnson's support. Then she remembered the name Johnson had mentioned, Savannah Reed, the biology teacher. A quick search on her phone showed that Miss Reed taught at River Rock High School, where Lily's younger sister was a student. It wasn't much of a connection, but it would have to do, because one thing was clear to Lily. Whatever Alexander Johnson was planning, innocent lives were at stake, and time was running out. Savannah woke before her alarm, adrenaline having kept her tossing and turning most of the night. Michael's text about the emergency evaluation had been a ray of hope, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into dangerous territory by challenging Alexander Johnson. She dressed in practical clothes for field work, jeans, a flannel shirt, and the hiking boots Michael had suggested. As she made coffee, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Miss Reed, this is Lily Morgan. You don't know me, but I work for Alexander Johnson, and The woman's voice was hushed, nervous. "I think you and those bear cubs are in danger." Savannah's hand tightened around her mug. "What kind of danger?" "I overheard Mr. Johnson last night. He was talking to Ethan Marshall about sanitizing some area before you and Ranger Hayes could inspect it. And he said something about the cubs being resolved by morning. I think he's planning to get rid of them. The evidence." Ice flooded Savannah's veins. "When did you hear this?" "Last night around 9. I've been afraid to call until now. I'm risking my job, maybe worse, but I couldn't live with myself if something happened to those animals because I stayed silent." "You're doing the right thing," Savannah assured her, already grabbing her keys. "Is there anything else you can tell me? Any details about what he's planning?" "Just that he sent someone to the wildlife center last night to scout it out, I think." "Thank you, Lily. Stay safe, and delete this call from your history." Savannah immediately called Michael, relieved when he answered on the first ring. "I was about to call you," he said before she could speak. "We had an intruder at the center last night. Nothing was taken, but—" "It's worse than that," Savannah cut in, explaining Lily's call as she rushed to her car. "Johnson is planning something at the center today, and he's going to destroy evidence at the site before our inspection." There was a moment of tense silence before Michael responded. "Get to the center now. I'll call in every staff member available and alert state police. Johnson may have influence in River Rock, but this just escalated beyond local jurisdiction." Savannah drove faster than was strictly legal, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. By the time she reached the wildlife center, the parking lot was filled with staff vehicles and 2 police cruisers. Michael met her at the entrance, his expression grim. "We've moved the cubs to a secure area and doubled security. State police are sending officers, but they're at least an hour out." "What about the property inspection?" "If Johnson is destroying evidence right now—" "I've got 2 rangers heading there with cameras, but they can't enter the property until the official papers arrive. For now, they'll document anything they can see from public land." Savannah followed Michael through the center to a windowless room deep within the building. Inside, a staff veterinarian was examining the 5 bear cubs in a temporary enclosure. "How are they?" Savannah asked, her eyes immediately finding Hope, who looked even smaller and more fragile than she remembered. The vet looked up with a worried expression. "The 4 larger cubs are stable, but this little one—" She gently lifted Hope, who barely responded to the handling. "She's failing. Whatever trauma they experienced, it hit her hardest." "She needs her mother," Michael said quietly. Savannah turned to him. "The mother is still searching, right? Can't we try to reunite them?" "It's risky. These cubs are still weak, and reintroductions don't always work if the separation has been too long. Plus, with Johnson targeting them." "But if Hope is dying anyway?" Savannah pressed. "And what better place to protect them than with their mother, deep in the forest where Johnson can't reach them?" Michael considered this. "It's unorthodox, but you might be right. The mother has been returning to the same area repeatedly, an old growth section at the edge of Johnson's property. If we could safely transport the cubs there—" Their discussion was interrupted by a staff member bursting into the room. "Ranger Hayes, there's a fire at the north entrance." Chaos erupted as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Michael immediately took charge, directing staff to implement emergency protocols and evacuate animals from endangered areas. "This is no coincidence," he told Savannah, as they helped move cages of smaller animals toward the south exit. Johnson's trying to create a diversion. For what? To get to the cubs, we need to... A massive explosion rocked the building, cutting Michael off mid-sentence. The lights flickered and went out, leaving only emergency lighting casting eerie shadows down the corridors. Generator room, Michael said grimly. They've cut power to the security systems. Savannah's heart pounded as she realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just evidence tampering or corporate corruption. This was a coordinated attack on a wildlife facility, putting dozens of animals and people at risk. The cubs, she said urgently. We need to get them out of here now. Michael nodded. There's a service exit through the rehabilitation kitchen. Get Dr. Peterson to help you load the cubs into transport crates. Take my truck. Keys are in my office, second drawer. Head for the old fire road that runs along the eastern edge of the preserve. I'll meet you there when I can. What about you? I need to make sure everyone gets out safely. Go, Savannah. Those cubs are counting on you. With one last worried glance at Michael, Savannah ran back to the secure room where the cubs were kept. Dr. Peterson was already preparing transport crates, her movements efficient despite the chaos. Help me get them in, she instructed Savannah. Careful with the small one. Together, they transferred the frightened cubs into 2 reinforced crates. The 4 stronger cubs went into one larger container, while Hope was placed in a smaller one with a heating pad. Keep her warm, Dr. Peterson said, handing Savannah a bag of supplies. There's formula and syringes in here if she needs feeding. And this, she pressed a small device into Savannah's hand, is a tracking fob keyed to the mother bear's collar. The closer you get, the faster it will pulse. Savannah tucked everything into a backpack and carefully lifted the crates. Thank you. Be safe. Navigating the smoke-filled corridors with 2 bear cub crates was challenging, but Savannah managed to reach Michael's office without encountering anyone. She found his keys exactly where he said they would be, along with a loaded tranquilizer gun that she added to her backpack after a moment's hesitation. The service exit led to a small staff parking area where Michael's Forest Service truck was parked. Savannah loaded the cubs into the back seat, securing the crates with seat belts, then climbed into the driver's seat. As she started the engine, a figure emerged from the smoke billowing from the main building. Not Michael, as she had hoped, but a tall, muscular man she recognized from Johnson's office, Ethan Marshall. He spotted her immediately, his eyes narrowing as he changed course toward the truck. Savannah's hands shook as she threw the vehicle into reverse, but Marshall was already reaching for the driver's door. In a split-second decision, Savannah hit the gas hard, reversing sharply. Marshall jumped back, barely avoiding being hit. She shifted into drive and sped toward the exit, watching in the rearview mirror as Marshall ran for another vehicle. Hold on, little ones, she murmured to the cubs as she turned onto the main road. We're going to find your mama. The old fire road Michael had mentioned was unmarked, but Savannah had been hiking in these woods enough to recognize the turnoff. The narrow dirt track wound through dense forest, becoming progressively more overgrown the further she drove. After about 20 minutes, the road became too rough for the truck. Savannah pulled into a small clearing and checked on the cubs. The 4 in the larger crate were huddled together, alert and watching her with wary eyes. Hope, however, lay motionless in her smaller container, her breathing shallow. "Stay with me, little fighter," Savannah whispered, offering a small amount of formula which the cub didn't even attempt to drink. She pulled out the tracking device Dr. Peterson had given her. It emitted a slow, steady pulse, indicating the mother bear was in range but still distant. According to the small display, she needed to head northeast. Savannah faced a difficult decision. Carrying both crates through the forest alone would be nearly impossible, especially over rough terrain. But leaving the cubs behind wasn't an option, not with Marshall potentially in pursuit. After some consideration, she transferred all 5 cubs into the larger crate. It was crowded, but they seemed to take comfort in the closeness. Even little Hope, who was immediately surrounded by her siblings. With the crate secured to a frame backpack from Michael's truck, Savannah started through the forest. The weight was substantial, and she knew she couldn't travel far or fast. Her only hope was to get close enough to the mother bear for the animal to sense her cubs. The tracking device led her deeper into the old-growth forest, across a small stream, and up a gradual incline. The pulse quickened as she climbed, indicating she was moving in the right direction. After about an hour of difficult hiking, Savannah had to rest. She gently set down the crate in a small clearing and checked on the cubs. They were surprisingly quiet, perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation. Even in her weakened state, Hope seemed to be sniffing the air with more interest than before. Savannah consulted the tracker again. The pulse was now rapid, suggesting the mother bear was close, perhaps within half a mile. She was gathering her strength to continue when a twig snapped behind her. She whirled around, her hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer gun in her backpack. But it wasn't Marshall who emerged from the trees. It was Logan Carter. "Ms. Reed," he said, holding up his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "Don't be scared, I'm here to help." "How did you—" Savannah began, confused and wary. "Get out of jail?" Logan finished for her. "Sheriff Bennett let me go this morning. Said the charges were being reconsidered. Then he told me what was happening at the Wildlife Center." He took a cautious step forward. "Michael sent me to find you. Johnson's men started a fire as a diversion, but it got out of control. Everyone's safe, but they've called in fire crews from 3 counties. Savannah relaxed slightly but kept her distance. "And I'm supposed to believe Michael sent you, of all people?" "He didn't have many options," Logan said simply. "Most of the staff are helping with the fire or the animal evacuation. And I know these woods better than anyone. Grew up hunting in them with my dad." His eyes fell on the crate. "Are those the cubs?" "All of them." Savannah nodded. 5. The smallest one, we call her Hope. She's not doing well." Logan approached slowly, kneeling to look at the cubs. His expression softened as he peered through the ventilation holes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, both to Savannah and to the cubs. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Why did you take them in the first place?" Savannah asked, the question that had been bothering her since she'd first heard his story. Logan sat back on his heels, his face troubled. "I told you Johnson hired me to clear land, which is true. But what I didn't say is that he specifically wanted me to take care of any wildlife I found. He knew the mother bear was denning there. That's why he wanted the area cleared before the cubs were born. He was deliberately trying to drive her out of the territory," Savannah realized. Logan nodded. The presence of an endangered species would prevent his development plans. "When I found the cubs, I was supposed to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "But you couldn't do it," Savannah said, understanding dawning. "I'm many things, Miss Reed, but I'm not a monster. I thought if I took them somewhere else, raised them until they could survive, then maybe—" He shook his head at the foolishness of his plan. "I panicked when Johnson started pressuring me for proof they were handled." A soft beeping from the tracking device interrupted them. The pulse had suddenly accelerated to an alarm rate. "She's close," Savannah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Logan tensed, scanning the forest around them. "How close?" Before Savannah could answer, A deep, rumbling growl emanated from a thicket of pines about 50 yards away. Both humans froze as a massive black bear emerged, her eyes fixed on them with unmistakable intent. The mother bear had found them. The mother bear stood on her hind legs, towering over 7 feet tall, her powerful form silhouetted against the forest backdrop. The silver tracking collar around her neck caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. She dropped back to all fours, her nostrils flaring as she scented the air. "Don't move," Logan whispered to Savannah, his body tense but calm. "She's not charging, she's assessing." Savannah remained perfectly still, her heart hammering in her chest. From the crate behind them came a series of soft whimpers as the cubs sensed their mother's presence. The mother bear took a tentative step forward, then another, her movements cautious but determined. She growled again, a warning rather than an immediate threat. "She smells her cubs," Logan murmured. "But she also smells humans, which she associates with danger." "What do we do?" Savannah whispered back, not taking her eyes off the bear. "We need to back away slowly and give her access to the crate," Logan instructed. "Once we're at a safe distance, we can open it remotely." As they began their careful retreat, a gunshot echoed through the forest. The mother bear roared in alarm and pain as a tranquilizer dart embedded itself in her shoulder. Savannah and Logan spun around to see Ethan Marshall emerging from the trees behind them, rifle in hand. "Step away from the bears," Marshall commanded, already loading another dart. "Johnson wants them all eliminated, and that's what's going to happen." Logan immediately placed himself between Marshall and the crate of cubs. "You don't have to do this, Ethan. These are innocent animals." "They're evidence," Marshall replied coldly, raising the rifle again. "Evidence that needs to disappear." The mother bear, agitated by the dart but not yet succumbing to the tranquilizer, charged toward the new threat. Marshall swung his rifle toward her, switching from a tranquilizer dart to what was clearly a lethal round. "No!" Savannah cried, lunging for her backpack and the tranquilizer gun inside. Everything happened in a blur of motion. Logan tackled Marshall as he fired, sending the shot wide. The mother bear, disoriented by the tranquilizer beginning to take effect, veered away from the humans and crashed through the underbrush. Marshall threw Logan off and scrambled to his feet, reaching for a handgun holstered at his side. But before he could draw it, Savannah fired the tranquilizer gun. The dart hit Marshall in the thigh, causing him to stagger. "You won't get away." Marshall slurred as the powerful sedative designed for large mammals coursed through his system. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious before he hit the forest floor. Logan quickly secured Marshall's weapons, then turned to Savannah with newfound respect in his eyes. "Nice shot. Biology teacher," she reminded him with a shaky smile. "I know my anatomy." Their momentary relief was interrupted by the sound of breaking branches as the mother bear, fighting the effects of the tranquilizer, returned to the clearing. She was moving more slowly now, her steps unsteady, but her focus remained on the crate containing her cubs. "We need to open the crate and get out of here," Logan said urgently. "Even with the tranquilizer, she's dangerous, especially if she thinks we're threatening her cubs." Together, they unlatched the crate, then retreated to what they hoped was a safe distance. The cubs immediately began to emerge, hesitant at first, then with growing excitement as they scented their mother. The mother bear woozily approached her cubs, sniffing each one thoroughly. The 4 stronger cubs crowded around her, rubbing against her legs and making soft huffing sounds of recognition. But Hope, the smallest cub, remained in the crate, too weak to join the reunion. After examining her stronger offspring, the mother bear seemed to realize one was missing. She returned to the crate, gently nosing at the tiny form inside. What happened next brought tears to Savannah's eyes. With extreme gentleness, the massive bear used her teeth to carefully lift Hope by the scruff of the neck, just as she would have carried her as a newborn. She placed the small cub between her front paws, licking and nuzzling her as the other cubs crowded around. Hope responded to her mother's attention with more energy than she had shown in days, her small head lifting to return the nuzzling. It was as if the mother's presence alone was a medicine no wildlife center could provide. "She's going to take care of them," Logan said softly. "All of them." Savannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After everything, Johnson's schemes, Marshall's violence, the fire at the center, this moment of natural love and reconnection felt like a miracle. The tranquilizer was taking a stronger hold on the mother bear now. She settled onto her side, her eyelids drooping. The cubs immediately snuggled against her, including little Hope, who positioned herself closest to the warmth of her mother's belly. "We should go," Logan said, eyeing Marshall's unconscious form. "That dose won't keep him out forever, and we need to get help." "What about the bears?" Savannah asked, reluctant to leave them vulnerable. "The mother won't be able to move for several hours. I know a place nearby, a cave system where they'll be safe until she recovers. Help me move them." Together, they carefully transported the drowsy mother bear and her cubs to the cave Logan described. It was well hidden and defensible, with only one narrow entrance. By the time they finished, the light was fading from the forest. "Michael should have sent backup by now," Savannah said, concerned by the lack of communication. Logan checked his phone. "No signal out here. We'll have to hike back to the truck and call from there." "What about Marshall?" "I secured him to a tree with his own zip ties," Logan said with grim satisfaction. "He won't be going anywhere until we send someone to collect him." As they made their way back through the darkening forest, Savannah's thoughts turned to the bigger picture. Even with Marshall in custody, we still don't have enough evidence to directly link Johnson to what happened. Marshall could claim he was acting alone. "Actually," Logan said, reaching into his pocket, "we might have exactly what we need." He pulled out a small digital voice recorder. "Started recording as soon as I saw Marshall in the woods. Got everything, including him saying Johnson wanted the bears eliminated." Savannah stared at him in amazement. "You thought to record it? In the middle of all that?" Logan shrugged. "When you've been burned as often as I have, you learn to keep evidence. And speaking of evidence," he pulled something else from his jacket, a folded document. "Found this when I was cleaning out my truck after being released. It's the original work order from Johnson, specifically instructing me to remove any wildlife obstacles on the property, his signature, his letterhead. Logan, this changes everything." A weary smile crossed his face. "Maybe it's time for things to change in River Rock. Maybe it's time someone stood up to the Johnsons, for people and animals alike." When they finally reached the truck, they found Michael and several state police officers waiting. The reunion was emotional. Michael had feared the worst when he couldn't reach Savannah by radio. "The fire's under control," he told them as they drove back toward town. "And with Marshall in custody and your evidence, we've got enough to bring Johnson in for questioning." "What about the bears?" Savannah asked. "Once the mother recovers from the tranquilizer, they'll be on the move," Michael explained. "We'll monitor them through her collar, but otherwise leave them be. The cubs are where they belong now, with their mother in the wild." 3 days later, Alexander Johnson was arrested on multiple charges, including environmental violations, conspiracy, assault, and attempted destruction of endangered species. The evidence Logan had preserved, combined with testimony from Lily Morgan about what she had overheard, created a case even Johnson's expensive lawyers couldn't easily dismiss. The story of the highway bear cubs, as they came to be known, spread far beyond River Rock. News outlets picked up the tale of corporate greed, environmental destruction, and the unlikely heroes who had saved a bear family against all odds. For Savannah Reed, the experience changed the trajectory of her career. While she continued teaching, she also became an outspoken advocate for wildlife protection, eventually establishing a program that brought high school students to the rehabilitation center as volunteers and interns. Logan Carter found redemption through his actions. With his record expunged as part of a deal for his testimony against Johnson, he was hired by the Wildlife Center as a field specialist, his intimate knowledge of the local forests proving invaluable to their conservation efforts. And Hope, the tiny cub who had nearly perished, defied all expectations. The Wildlife Center's trail cameras occasionally captured images of the mother bear and her 5 growing cubs, including one small female who, despite her rough start in life, was thriving in the wilderness she was born to inhabit. 1 year after the rescue, Savannah and Logan stood together on a viewing platform deep in the forest preserve that had once been Johnson property. The land had been seized and converted to protected habitat as part of the settlement of the case. Through binoculars, they watched as a black bear led 5 adolescent cubs through a meadow of wildflowers. The cubs were nearly grown now, but one, slightly smaller than the others, still stayed closest to her mother. "Hope," Savannah said softly, recognizing the bear she had once cradled in her jacket. Logan nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. Sometimes the smallest ones turn out to be the strongest. As they watched the bear family disappear into the trees, Savannah reflected on how a cruel act of abandonment had ultimately led to protection for these woods and all the creatures who called them home. The Johnson development would never threaten this land again. "They're free," she said, lowering her binoculars, "truly free." And in their freedom, she had found her own purpose, ensuring that the wild places and wild things of River Rock would be preserved for generations to come. The abandoned cubs had not only survived, they had helped save an entire ecosystem, and in the process, they had taught their human champions the power of compassion, courage, and standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves. As Savannah and Logan left the observation platform hand in hand, neither of them saw the smallest bear cub pause at the forest's edge, looking back at the humans with an intelligence that seemed to transcend the boundary between species, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual bond they would always share. In the years that followed, whenever Savannah told the story of the highway bear cubs to her students, she always ended with the same message. Sometimes the cruelest actions can lead to the greatest kindness, and sometimes the smallest among us can create the biggest change. It was a lesson born from those desperate days of rescue and reunion, a lesson about hope, perseverance, and the profound difference that compassionate choices can make in a world too often ruled by greed and power. 5 years after the events that changed River Rock forever, the town held its first annual Wildlife Conservation Festival. The main attraction was the unveiling of a bronze statue depicting a mother bear with 5 cubs, placed in the town square where Johnson's corporate headquarters once stood. The building had been converted into an environmental education center after the Johnson empire crumbled under the weight of investigations that followed his arrest. Logan, now the head ranger at the expanded wildlife preserve, stood beside Savannah as she cut the ribbon at the ceremony. Their partnership, which began in the midst of danger and uncertainty, had blossomed into love and eventually marriage. Together, they had established the Hope Foundation, which funded wildlife rehabilitation and forest conservation efforts throughout the state. Lily Morgan, whose brave decision to come forward had been crucial to building the case against Johnson, was now the Foundation's administrative director. She often said that the frightening night when she overheard Johnson's plans had been the best thing that ever happened to her, leading her to work she truly believed in. Sheriff Bennett had retired after the Johnson case, replaced by a younger officer committed to environmental protection. Even Ethan Marshall had found a path to redemption, serving his sentence and then working with troubled youth, teaching them wilderness skills and respect for nature. As for Hope, the smallest cub who had nearly perished that day by the highway, trail cameras occasionally captured images of her with cubs of her own, leading a new generation through the protected forests of River Rock. The wildlife biologists who monitored the area's bear population noted something unusual about Hope's behavior. Unlike most bears, she showed no fear when research teams worked in her territory, almost as if she remembered that humans had once saved her life. On the anniversary of the rescue each year, Savannah and Logan would hike to the observation platform and wait, binoculars ready. More often than not, as twilight settled over the forest, a bear that was slightly smaller than average but moved with unmistakable confidence would appear at the edge of the meadow, sometimes alone, sometimes with cubs trailing behind her. She would pause, raise her head to scent the air, and seem to look directly at the platform before continuing on her way. "She remembers," Savannah would whisper, and Logan would squeeze her hand in silent agreement. The cruel abandonment that had once threatened 5 innocent lives had instead sparked a movement, transformed a community, and protected countless animals for generations to come. It was a reminder of nature's resilience, of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and compassion, and of the unexpected ways that kindness could multiply when people chose to stand up for what was right. As the Conservation Festival concluded and the crowds dispersed, Savannah found herself alone by the bear statue for a moment. She reached out to touch the bronze paw of the smallest cub, Hope's representation, and smiled at the thought of the real bear roaming free in the forest beyond the town. "You did it, little one," she whispered. "You showed us all how to be brave." And somewhere in the protected forests of River Rock, a family of bears continued to thrive, living proof that even the darkest beginning can lead to a brighter future.